All right, we're off now, so make sure to work hard. Don't expect any souvenirs, okay? And take care of Mark for us. Was getting married just to hear these words from my in-laws what I had signed up for? After all, caring for the family is the wife's job once she's married. Nothing can be done about it. My husband too told me this nonchalantly. I should have never married. Feeling hopeless about my cold-hearted family-in-law, tears started to spill out unexpectedly. But little did I know at that moment an unlikely savior for my future life was about to emerge. My name is Dorothy, 45 years old, and just celebrated 20 years of marriage. We live in a multi-generational household, which is quite rare these days. The family includes my husband's grandfather, his parents, and us. My grandfather-in-law, Mark, is 88 years old. We just finished celebrating his birthday. My grandmother-in-law passed away about 15 years ago. Mark is a lively man who still heads out to play gateball once a week, always cheerful and smiling. He seems to have many friends and acquaintances, and often we have guests over at the house. Contrastingly, my in-laws are gloomy and spiteful. They seem to have few friends and mostly keep to themselves, muttering something while watching TV. Then there's my husband and me. We knew about the living arrangement before getting married, and I consented to it. I grew up in a household with my grandparents, so I thought this was what marriage entailed. My parents managed well enough with my grandparents. We lived in a rural area where agriculture thrives. Back then, living together like this was the norm. Initially, I got along with my in-laws, or so I thought. My father-in-law, Anthony, seemed more interested in work than family, and my mother-in-law, Kimberly, wasn't the meddling type. So we maintained a certain distance until everything changed. It started when we discovered my husband was infertile. After 12 years of marriage, we struggled to conceive. We discussed it and decided to seek fertility treatment, hopeful. I'm sorry, sir, but the doctor revealed the issue lay with my husband, and treatment seemed hopeless. I was shocked, but my husband and in-laws were even more devastated. My husband took a week off from work and stayed in bed, while Anthony became utterly disengaged. Then Kimberly changed dramatically. You marrying my son made him infertile. You're like a snake bringing misfortune. Get out right now. She had never been this abusive before, but she began to see me as an enemy after learning about my husband's infertility. I suppose she was shocked to learn that her son couldn't father children. In rural areas, having children is somewhat a status symbol, especially since my husband had no siblings. So I endured Kimberly's harsh words, thinking it was temporary and things would return to normal, but that was a mistake. Her attitude towards me gradually influenced Anthony. Why didn't you go to the hospital sooner, you useless wife? Marrying you has only brought misfortune to my son. Even my husband began blaming me. It's all your fault I can't have kids. That's what he started saying. He seemed to forget the problem was his, and I became the common enemy of his family. 8 years later, our marriage is strained and beyond repair. Even if I stay with this person, the thought of divorce crossed my mind many times, but the reason I didn't do it was because I had nowhere to go. My parents had passed away soon after I got married, and I had to quit my job when I got married. There's no way for an ordinary woman with no qualifications or education to survive in the countryside. I was convinced that if I got divorced, I would just decay by the roadside. During this time, my only solace was my husband's grandfather, Mark. Dorothy, sorry to bother you, but we have guests coming. Could you go shopping at the supermarket in the next town? You can keep the change, he would say, giving me money secretly from my husband. Dorothy, your cooking is always delicious, and your cleaning is meticulous, just like a professional. He would compliment my housework. When my parents-in-law or husband were not around, it was truly enjoyable to talk and relax at home with Mark. It was like remembering my late grandfather. However, about a year ago, something changed with Mark. Dorothy, is tomorrow the day of the trip? Trip? Aren't we all going on a trip with the family tomorrow? Such unnatural conversations were the start of realizing that Mark was showing symptoms of dementia. Then Kimberly started making unpleasant faces. "Mary, do you know where my glasses are?" "Huh? I'm Kimberly. Mary was your late wife." "You are Kimberly?" "Yes, it's really annoying." Until then, Kimberly hadn't spoken so harshly to Mark, her father-in-law. From my perspective, she had always treated Mark with proper courtesy. But once she realized he had dementia, she seemed to stop pretending. "Kimberly, it's not good to yell at someone with dementia, and saying negative things is—" I tried to relay what I learned from the doctors at the hospital. They said that proper treatment of people with dementia is crucial to prevent rapid deterioration. "What? Are you defying me? How insolent can you be?" Kimberly's words made me shut my mouth. "You should take good care of Mark. Don't forget the favor of living in this house." "Living here as a favor?" As I said that, Anthony cut in. "That's right. Since we don't have kids, you just moved in without any hesitation." "It's because that person—" "What? Do you have something to say?" I was about to say, "Isn't it because that person is sterile?" but I stopped myself just before saying it. I felt like saying that would be the end of me as a human being. "Mom, Dad, don't blame her too much. It's pitiful." My husband defended me, but in a way that seemed indifferent, as if he were reluctantly protecting me. Kimberly then declared, "If you don't take care of him, nobody will. We and Matthew are too busy." "What busy?" Kimberly spends her days listlessly at home, and Anthony only goes out to the casino when he feels like it. Even my husband, lately with the ongoing recession, comes home on time without any overtime. But Mark really ends up isolated. Such worries crossed my mind. If they're not going to do anything, then I want to take care of it. That's what I thought. I was ready to leave the house immediately if they told me to divorce and leave because I didn't care about them. But I couldn't leave this house, not with Mark in such a state. That's how my life as a caregiver began. Mark was physically strong, so he could manage things like going to the bathroom and eating on his own. However, people with dementia might start a fire or wander off far away, so I couldn't take my eyes off Mark. "Mary, it's nice weather today, isn't it?" "Yes, it is." "So, is it going to snow tomorrow?" Before I knew it, he started mistaking me for his late wife, and we couldn't have a proper conversation. But his gentle, smiling face was still the same as before. That smile somehow made me feel kinder, too. One day during my caregiving life, "It's tiring having a dementia patient in the house, so I'm going to take this opportunity to go on a trip." What opportunity could she be talking about? Christmas was coming soon, and we needed to prepare for the family gathering. I was too busy with caregiving. "Could you please stay home for Christmas? Relatives will be visiting," I tried saying. "What are you talking about? That's the job of a wife who lives together after getting married. You do it." "You're the same, though," I muttered to myself. But it seemed Kimberly no longer had that awareness, and to my surprise, Anthony and even my husband said that they would go on that trip. "It's a family trip after all. It's natural for the family to go together." "I can't do it alone. I can't take my eyes off Mark for even a moment." Then Anthony said something outrageous. "We'll figure something out. If he's that dangerous, just tie him to the bed." What a thing to say about his own father. "That's true. It's not like he understands anything anyway." It was disgusting that Kimberly agreed with those words, and despite my objections, they went on the trip. "We'll be going now, so work hard. Don't expect any souvenirs. Take care of Mark. Taking care of him is the job of a wife who lives together after getting married, so it can't be helped." All I could do was watch them leave in astonishment. What am I doing here? Of course, I think I'm here to take care of Mark now. But what was Mark protecting this house for? Surely he didn't build a house big enough for 3 generations, just for his heartless children and grandchildren. If he had his cognitive functions intact, would he have witnessed this sad reality? I even thought it might be better that he had dementia, and I started to cry. While they were on the trip, I spent time alone with Mark. I told the relatives to cancel coming over because I'm not feeling well this year. I wish they would never come back. That's how I spent Christmas. And then my husband and parents-in-law returned from their 3-night, 4-day trip. They must have had a great time. Anthony returned, boasting a brand new watch he likely bought on the trip, and Kimberly linking arms with him. "I'm so lucky to have such a dutiful son," said. "Back already?" The brief peace in my home was over, and it became uncomfortable a place to live again. As I thought this, loud footsteps came from the back of the room. "Anthony, why have you been leaving Dorothy behind?" Mark confronted my husband with an angry expression. "Anthony?" My husband looked confused. Anthony is the name of Mark's son. Mark's cognitive function had deteriorated to this point. "I'm not Anthony, I'm your grandson Matthew. Anthony is over there. Mark, has your cognitive impairment worsened?" What a way to talk. Mark's sharp gaze and tone were unlike his usual gentle self. Then he glared at Kimberly, who was next to my husband. "Kimberly, your upbringing was wrong. How can you speak to elders like that?" "Mark, how can you say that?" Kimberly was in a bad mood, scolded in a stern tone by a dignified Mark. I was astonished, having never seen Mark speak so harshly before. At that moment, I realized something but wasn't sure if I should voice it. For now, I decided to watch the situation. While glaring at Kimberly, Mark continued, "You've become a vulgar woman. When you got married, you were very refined. But Mary knew everything. She despised you for hiding your true self." "Huh? What are you talking about? When are you referring to?" It must have been nearly 50 years ago when Kimberly married into the family. "You've always been a nasty woman. When I stayed quiet, you took advantage. Really, you're untrustworthy." Everyone was shocked at Mark's drastic change. It's true that when someone who rarely gets angry does, it's incredibly frightening. "Dad, what's gotten into you?" Anthony tried to calm Mark by putting his hand on his shoulder, but Mark fiercely resisted. "Don't touch me. I won't let someone like you in this house." With that, Mark easily drove Anthony out of the house, locking the door behind him. "Mark!" Anthony shouted angrily from the other side of the door, but Mark simply said, "Be quiet." Anthony quickly quieted down. We all knew it was rare for Mark to raise his voice in anger. "Mark, your cognitive impairment has progressed. You're telling such lies." Kimberly was struggling to find words. "Dorothy, isn't this your fault for not looking after him properly?" Kimberly started yelling in a panic. "Yeah, Dorothy, it's your fault Mark's illness has gotten worse." My husband joined in, trying to blame me to maintain his sanity. At that moment, Mark and I made eye contact. His straightforward gaze. I felt like I saw some truth in his eyes. That's when I made my decision. "If you say it's my fault, then I'm no longer needed in this house. I'll leave." I spoke calmly. My husband and Kimberly said simultaneously. "So if my being here worsens Mark's illness, it's better that I'm not around. You think so too, right, Mark?" I prompted Mark for agreement. However, Mark had become immobile, like a doll whose battery had run out, and did not respond to my questions. Then Kimberly burst out in anger again. "He was talking so energetically just a moment ago. You must have done something to Mark." But then, as if Mark's battery was turned back on, "Kimberly, be quiet. Even the elderly have ears. Your voice is annoying." "Annoying? Mark, what's really happened to you?" "You're a truly disagreeable woman. If I could go back 50 years, I would have never allowed you to marry." Shocked by Mark's words, Kimberly, like a schoolgirl, ran crying back to her room. Left behind were my husband, me, and Mark. "What happened with Mark?" my husband timidly asked me. "I don't know. If you're so concerned, why don't you talk to Mark?" But I responded sharply to my husband. While he hesitated, fidgeting with his fingers, Mark spoke again. "Anthony, how long will you stay childish? Grow up a bit. What do you mean by leaving the house empty on Christmas? I'm Matthew, not Anthony. Mark, has your mind really gone?" "No, it's different. It is. The one who is wrong is you. Why can't you cherish your own wife?" Someone like that is not my grandson. Get out. What do you mean? Not just you, Anthony and Kimberly too. I won't let you roam freely in this house anymore. Mark's eyes showed he was serious. My husband, taken aback by Mark's sudden awakening, could only tremble and stand frozen. I had realized it from the beginning. He was pretending to have dementia. He scolded my husband as Anthony, his son, but started lecturing Kimberly using her correct name. If he truly had dementia, Kimberly would be Anthony's wife, and he wouldn't have said things like, "Your education as mom is wrong." Mark, why would you pretend to have dementia? I've been found out. Embarrassing. I thought I had to do this to protect you, Dorothy. This was his explanation. Mark was quite worried about the attacks I received from my parents-in-law and the poor relationship with my husband. He knew that simply telling Kimberly to be nicer to Dorothy or advising my husband to get along with your wife wouldn't solve anything. He sympathized with me, who was bravely managing the household despite the circumstances. So he decided to act. What would the family's reaction be if he became dementia-stricken? Perhaps if I started caring for him, they would change their mind out of gratitude towards me. But the situation worsened. So Mark planned his final act. Pretending to have dementia, letting out my emotions, I thought they might learn a lesson. I'm not good at raising my voice or yelling at people. So that was it. Thank you for thinking so much about it. I'm sorry for pretending to have dementia and making you care for me. His acting and presence were so convincing I had no idea it was a lie. I realized anew how incredible Mark was. Later it was decided that the house where the 3 generations of us lived would be put up for sale. Mark's word could easily make things happen, because all the property and house were in Mark's name. Leaving a will that disinherited his son and wife, Mark moved into a retirement home. Retired and living off Mark's vast fortune, my parents-in-law were unable to hide their shock at his swift decision. Dad, how can you not leave us any inheritance? Suddenly we have nowhere to live and we don't have any savings. What are we supposed to do? My parents-in-law had lost all their assets and money. And at the same time, my husband was also kicked out of the house. Dorothy, what are you going to do now? What do you mean? I've got a job, so I'm leaving this town. What about a place to live? Why should I tell you that? We're practically strangers now. That's when I remembered that I hadn't mentioned anything about divorce to this man. I had forgotten to discuss it, feeling no longer connected as a couple. Am I that insignificant to you, even as your husband? I wonder. You're more than insignificant, you're irrelevant. That's why I'll leave the divorce papers with you. Submit them or not, I don't care anymore. With those words, I left him. Surprisingly, he filed the divorce papers a week later and the divorce was finalized. My husband and parents-in-law seemed to be living in an apartment near our old house. It must be hard for them, living in the countryside with labels like the couple who angered Mark and got kicked out, and the son who was dumped by his wife. But that's none of my concern. Mark, thank you for everything. You've given me a chance to start a new life. That day, I was visiting Mark in his retirement home. Dorothy, I owe you so much. You deserve to be happy. In fact, the job and the move I had managed with Mark's help. I was the one who was grateful. Dorothy, I know you're busy, but could you come visit me sometimes? Seeing you well is what keeps me going. Of course I will. As tears welled up, I held Mark's hand and nodded repeatedly to his words.